No, that's okay. I just wanted to point out, in answer to your question, in the end, it does say that the district generally doesn't test the student in the end. And in other words, the parent is allowed to opt out, but they count the student as absent. So the mass confusion is coming directly from the State Department of Education when they are giving two mixed messages, two different messages, none of which are based in law.
I have just one other question. When they say at the end your student will be marked as absent, my understanding is that they still have to provide a program for your child. They're just absent from the test.
Correct.
They're not absent from school.
Correct.
East Adams making you take your student out of the building.
I don't think that's legal.
Well, according, we're talking, again, this is where the mass confusion comes in, because according to this letter from the State Department of Education, it is absent for the purpose of testing. But how anyone else interprets this letter when they're giving two diametrically opposed directions can be anyone's case.
Standardized testing's been around for years. I took it when I was a young person. Has this been an issue all along, or what's changed now that
the time that's involved in testing? Of course, I've taken standardized testing in the 3rd grade, the 6th grade, and 9th grade. It lasted 2 days each time. Testing now is lasting for 2-3 weeks each time. Now we're talking about with SBAC doing it 4 times a year. And why are these kids being frustrated? What's going on? It's the amount of time that's going on. And you're hearing from parents when we hear about, when I went to Portland, when I went to East Haddam, what parents are we hearing from? We're hearing from the parents that have more or less disenfranchised. My poorest communities are the most devastated communities because parents in those communities are bullied time and time again. And they don't have anyone. They don't have attorneys. They don't have me to come and stand up. They don't have parents that necessarily can do this. Not that their parents don't want to. Their parents are working 2, 70, 80 hours a week at minimum wage jobs. So what we have is a disenfranchised community being bullied. But the difference between standardized testing today and in the past is the amount of time. And one more thing. When Terry was up here, she mentioned she was waiting on testing results. Make no mistake about it, we're not against testing. What she was talking about was diagnostic assessments. Diagnostic assessments are assessments that are done for an individual that give you a baseline and tell you what you can do with that individual. That moves differentiated instruction. You don't hear anyone up here complaining about teacher quizzes, teacher book reports, term papers, any of those. None of those complaints are happening here. They're not complaining about any of those things. They're not complaining about midterms and final exams, because I had those too when I went to school. But again, I said that, let me give you this. In 2010, I walked 400 miles. I walked from Central Connecticut State University to Washington, D.C. to protest high-stakes assessment and the abuse that they were causing. And when I went on that walk, I talked to parents in Connecticut, talked to parents and teachers in New Jersey and New York, in Delaware, in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, in Maryland, and I ended up at the American University. And what did we discuss? It wasn't really that I was talking to them, I was listening. This is what I'm so glad we have our legislator from Southampton. I'm so glad that Tim Ackett came here and said, we'll give you the room, because what I was doing was listening. And in those rooms, every time I do my walk, I was 50 pounds heavier. I'm not the most healthiest guy in the world, but I lost 50 pounds on that walk. I kept it off because I'm still walking. But what happened was there were teachers there, special ed teachers, reading teachers, and parents, and they started talking about their children being, as I said before, either preparing, practicing, or taking the test for 8 to 12 weeks. So you tell me something. If they gave me a standardized test for 8 to 12 weeks when I was in school, let me tell you, we probably would have burned down the school. That's a little bit abusive. Sorry.
Can I just ask Deborah one more question on, when I called the State Department of Education to ask them about this, and they said, I thought they said that it is in statute that students have to take a mastery test, and that this is their mastery test, essentially. And this is their substitute for a mastery test. It's their new version of a mastery test. No?
The new test is not a mastery test, and the test that's being given this year is just to see if there are problems with the test. And the kids are really being used as guinea pigs by the testing company to work out the kinks in the test. So that's not a mastery test, as the law says. And what bothers me is that they sent this letter to the superintendents, and basically it's setting up a system of intimidating the parents and hoping they'll go away on an issue that is very important to them and to their children. So I say I send a letter, I want to opt out, and I'm told, no, you can't, it's against the law. In their minds, hopefully, I will say, oh, okay, I'm a good law-abiding person, I will go away. But if I'm really serious about this, I'm going to go to the next step. They're going to ask me to put it in writing, and I'm going to say, I will. This is my child. This is my belief. This is something I'm very, passionate about. So I don't want my child tested. So if I stick with it, eventually it says, okay, you can tell them that we'll opt their kid out, but they'll be coming. Why should the parent have to go through that? Why should they have to do that for something that's important to them and to their child? As a teacher, I mean, I'm retired now, but if I were in the classroom, I would want to tell parents they can opt out. But a lot of the teachers I talked to said, oh, I would get in so much trouble if I did that. So they post it on their Facebook pages. So they tell it to people in the grocery store. So they tell it when they're having drinks. And hopefully we'll get the message out that you can opt out. Test if you don't want your child. And my dream is that everybody will opt out and nobody will be given a test, and teachers can really get back to educating children in a way that is good for them, not just preparing them for a test.